Welcome to the Alcohol Free Life podcast. I'm Janey Grace. This is for you if you've quit the booze or you'd like to, or maybe you're just sober curious. I'll bring you tips and motivation without any judgment, and there'll be inspiration from experts, quit-lit authors, and sober heroes. Hi and welcome to the podcast, and a huge thank you to everyone who took the time to subscribe and rate the show. I've had some really nice reviews and I was really thrilled to check into the charts, and there it was last week at number 24 in the health chart, directly behind Annie Grace and This Naked Mind. How cool is that? She was at 23. So yeah, really great. I'm really grateful, and I'm guessing it's because I've had such awesome guests. I couldn't have done it on my own. So thank you again so far to Laura from Club Soda, Claire Pooley, author of The Sober Diaries, and Catherine Gray, author of The Unexpected Joy of Being Sober. And I went back and reread the whole of that book, and I loved it even more second time around. I think it was because the first time I read the book, I was only a few weeks into not drinking, and I think I just kind of skimmed it frantically, trying to get to the bits that were relating to how I was feeling, and I missed a lot of the nuances. And she's such a great writer, and this time I was able to really lap up some of the descriptive stuff. If you're reading it at the moment, just notice some of her amazing descriptive paragraphs. I love the way she describes the joy of a sober new year in Edinburgh. Just magical. Now, as you're aware on this podcast, my focus, what I really want to kind of focus on is I want to inspire and encourage people who've made this decision to change the drinking habits, to keep inspired to keep going, but also to look at self-care and great nutrition and all of those other things that people suddenly find time for once they're not, pouring booze on their head. And this can be the time when you can suddenly remember that actually food can taste good and there is an exercise program that you might enjoy. So we're into February, of course, the month of love, with Valentine's Day and all, but I would really love to focus on self-love through this month. And so my guests will all support that in some way. And of course, I'm not talking about egotistical loving yourself and preening yourself. It's not that kind of attitude at all. It's about being authentic and about being true to your own values. And that can be kind of hard sometimes when you're drinking too much. Now, today's guest is Dr. David Hamilton. I've known David for years, and we're both Hay House authors. And I love David's approach to self-esteem and kindness, and the fact that he's a former scientist really adds weight to all of his views. I mean, I've read all of his books, and they're all fantastic, and it all starts with acts of kindness to yourself. I read a post on one of the groups that I'm part of, and people who'd given up drinking were talking about just how much they now realise they'd neglected themselves, because while you're drinking, there's never seems to be the time or the money or the wherewithal to properly look after yourself, to book the time at the hairdressers, treat yourself to coffee and cake with a friend, with somewhere swanky. And I remember always avoiding having desserts or any kind of sugar, even when I really fancied it, because I wanted to save all the calories for the wine. And I remember Catherine Gray saying that once she got sober, she finally booked an appointment with a dentist, because somehow your fuddled, boozy brain makes those little acts of self-care feel just too difficult, too overwhelming somehow. And of course, when you're drinking too much, you're often not as kind as you might be to others either. I can remember things that I've said, or rather other people have reminded me, that the rational me, things that the rational me wouldn't have said. It makes me shudder to think about that, actually. So I do think once you've gotten off that booze train, it's a great time to take stock and think about kindness, think about acts of self-care to yourself and to others. So David Hamilton is the perfect guest to kick off the month of self-love. Hi and welcome, and I'm so thrilled that today I get to speak to one of my old mates, Dr. David Hamilton. It's so lovely to have you with us on the show, David, former scientist and author of, oh my goodness, is it 10 books now? Welcome.
10, Yeah.
Wow. It's
Yeah.
lovely to talk to you, David. Now, for anyone who hasn't come across your work, you're kind of known really as the king of kindness, and you've written a few books around kindness and why kindness is good for you, and we'll get into that in a little while. But just to give people a little bit of background who maybe haven't come across you before, tell us about your really sort of fascinating work that you used to do, which kind of led on to what you do now. And I've heard the story before, but I'm delighted to hear it again, and I'm sure anybody else feels the same way.
Yeah. Well, of course. Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on here. It's really great to hang out and have a wee chat
Yeah.
again. Well, to be honest, I think most people maybe listening haven't heard really my backstory. So I started out working in the pharmaceutical industry. I did a PhD in science called organic chemistry, which is nothing to do with organic food, unfortunately. It's more like adult Lego, but instead of taking Lego bricks of different shapes and sizes to build, buildings and things, so organic chemists take atoms of different shapes and sizes and we build molecules, and that becomes, so people like me usually get hired by pharmaceutical companies, and the Lego constructions you're making are drugs. But what really fascinated me during that time was how people were improving on placebos. So I started in my spare time to research the placebo effect and collect not only statistics, but an understanding of not only how, but why it actually works. So how is it and why does it happen? Why is it that you think something or feel something or believe something, and that would actually have a healing effect? Because I remember my colleagues would always dismiss it as just the placebo effect. And that was a habit that you learn when you go into the pharmaceutical industry, to dismiss it as it's just the placebo effect without really any thought of what it actually is. So I decided to look into it and understand why it happened. And because it was so interesting, I decided, I became passionate about understanding how your mind and emotions and could affect your body and wanting to help people. So I decided to resign from the industry after about 4 years, really, of working in that field, that environment.
It's fascinating, David, and I know I've heard you speak about how you then looked at into depth with this placebo effect. And tell us a story about how you discovered that, I can't remember exactly what it was, but something to do with people learning to play the piano, even managed to not, well, you tell the story, it'd be much better than me trying.
Yeah, it's a fascinating example. See, I'd become fascinated with the effects of visualization. A lot of people visualize, whether it's to improve their health or even to improve their life situation. And it's always been a real interest and a passion of mine, visualization. And I came across some research that was done at Harvard University, very famous neurologist called Alvaro Pascal Leon. And he had a group of volunteers who would sit in front of a piano and play a series of 5 notes on each of the 5 fingers. So they basically go plunk, 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 up and down a scale for 2 hours on 5 days, 5 consecutive days. Now, it's not 2 hours straight because that's tiring, but you do like a minute of playing the notes, 2 minutes of resting, a minute of playing the notes, something like that. But you're playing the notes for a couple of hours. And they had their brain scanned every day. And it turned out that the region of the brain connected to the finger muscles had grown like a muscle. In fact, if you measured it by about a factor of about 30 to 40 times. But the other part of the study was, while the group of volunteers were playing the notes physically on a piano, another group of volunteers had their hands flat on the table and they were to play the notes in their mind. So they were just to imagine they were plunking notes. So imagine the physical sensations, imagine feeling as if they really were playing the notes, but not playing the notes. Now, they did it for, again, 2 hours on the 5 consecutive days. They had their brain scans too, brain scanned as well. And the brain scans were exactly the same. In other words, the regions of their brain connected to their finger muscles had also changed in size by 30 to 40 times. And if you looked at both set of brain scans, those who played the notes versus those who imagined playing the notes, side by side, you cannot tell the difference. You cannot tell who played the notes or who imagined. In other words, in many ways, the brain doesn't make a distinction between whether you're doing something or whether you're imagining doing the something.
Yeah.
So the brain and the imaginary are much the same thing.
It's incredible, isn't it? And it's incredible when you think that it's only actually in recent years that we've understood neuroplasticity. You know, at one time we'd think, right, that's it, that's the way you are. And it's only recently we realise the power of the mind, really. For people who, but obviously I'm talking to a lot of people who want to give up the booze, or maybe they already have given up the booze. And they get this almost voice in their head saying, oh, I need another glass of wine, even though they've already had 3 or whatever it is. And many people get to the stage where they recognize, actually, this is about mindset, and it's about changing the mindset. How would you suggest people like that start? How do you even get started if you're brand new to all this, in just recognizing all this power that's actually within you?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think the notion itself, just knowing itself that the brain changes in response to your behaviors and actions, gives people hope. And it also gives people like an end point. The difficulty some people have, I feel, with changing aspects of life is they don't have an end point. They don't know when the end point will be. And so eventually they get to this point and think it's never going to happen. But when you understand a bit about neuroplasticity, you recognize that it only takes a relatively short period of time to build up enough new wiring in the brain so that the new wiring or the new circuitry of the brain is more dominant and stronger than the old stuff, because the less attention we give and the less we indulge in our previous patterns of behavior, then those brain circuits begin to shrink. Really just like if you stop exercising a muscle, the muscle will actually atrophy, it will shrink. Now that just mirrors the process in the brain of neuroplasticity kind of in reverse, so to speak. It's exactly the same process. So when people kind of understand that it only takes a finite period of time, then it actually gives people hope, and then a little bit of belief and a little bit more passion and determination, because they can see an endpoint. They know that in a certain period of time, which might be just 3 weeks or it might be a couple of months, it depends on the person, the effort, but people begin to realize, if I can just keep it up for that long, then the brand new circuitry of the brain will be stronger than the old stuff, and therefore I won't really have to make an effort. It will feel quite easy then, because the wiring of the brain has changed substantially. So that's the way I often teach about changes in behaviour, that you just have to, here's light at the end of the tunnel, you just need to give it a certain amount of time, and you'll find that the effort required will be significantly less.
Yeah. And how do we deal with this inner talk then, which of course we all have, don't we? We've all got that little voice telling us to, oh, go on, you have that 15th Jaffa cake or whatever it is, go on. Or, you're not good enough. We'll talk more about that little voice later. But we've all got the voice. We've all got the inner critic, the inner voice. So is it about, do you think, really noticing that? And then actually asking, well, is that true? In other words, separating yourself a little bit from that constantly nagging voice in your head.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, you nailed it in terms of how I look at things. Step number 1 is notice it, be aware of it. Unless we're aware of a behaviour, it's difficult to change it. So for me, the moment I notice something, I start to question it. There's a couple of different ways I do things. It depends on the context, depends on the situation. But sometimes what I have is a little phrase, a little one-liner that reminds me that I can do this, or something along those lines. And so whenever I become aware of myself behaving in a certain way, I'll stop and take a breath. And what the taking the breath does is it moves resources to the front of the brain. So you stop running on default. So you immediately bring the resources to that. So I take a sharp intake of breath sometimes, and I say my little phrase, right? And now most of the time that's enough. But other times when I find that it just goes back, and that's normal for some people, as it just knots back, then I start to inquire. I might take a piece of paper and inquire, why do I feel this way? Why do I behave in this way? Sometimes I just inquire about why I believe certain things, and it usually takes me back to thoughts or assumptions that I've made in the past without realising. And so I guess it's diving into your own beliefs, and usually I'll recognise a thought, a belief, or an assumption that I've picked up unconsciously maybe, or just assumed, and I'll say, oh my goodness, I can't believe I really thought that. That was when I was like 10-year-old or 15 or a child, when I didn't really understand the world the way I understand it now. So of course that's not true. Yeah. And it's almost like your awareness of it shines a little light on it. And then I find if I just keep attention on that over the next couple of days, on reminding myself that that's actually not true, this is true instead, then it becomes much easier to change a pattern, because I've almost gone deeper into something that was controlling it. And when I do that, then then that little voice doesn't even come back as much.
And this is very much linked, of course, to all the other books that you've written. I love the book I Heart Me, where you talk about self-love and, the importance of that. And it's very linked to that, of course, because, the stuff you're saying, most of us wouldn't say it to other people. I think it was Cheryl Richardson, who I once heard her at a Hay House conference that we were both speaking at. And she said, if you were standing in the bathroom and you're looking in the mirror and you're saying out loud the thoughts you are thinking. If there was a child in the room, you'd probably be had for abuse, because we say stuff to ourselves, whether out loud or in our head, that we wouldn't say to anybody else. We're very unkind, aren't we, to ourselves, which wraps up, beautifully into all the stuff that you've researched around both self-love and kindness. How do you think, where's the starting point there for somebody who is maybe locked into a pattern of addiction or behavior they really want to change, or just is not necessarily in a very good place, but they've got enough glimmer of hope to know there's a way out? So how do they start to remind themselves that they're worth loving?
Yeah, I think, again, it comes back to step number one again, is awareness. And sometimes it's about recognizing that so many of our patterns and so many of our difficulties and challenges in life, if you track back far enough, if you dig into your own thinking processes deep enough, we very often arrive at a place where we feel we lack a genuine inner sense of worthiness and value. And that's how I define self-love, an inner sense of worthiness and value, not necessarily self-esteem. People get confused sometimes with self-esteem, because there's two types of self-esteem. There's the outer stuff where we build our sense of worthiness and value on successes and achievements in life and people having a positive opinion. That's external self-esteem, whereas internal self-esteem is more like self-love. It's an inner sense of worthiness and value. And recognizing that so many of the difficulties and challenges can stem from that lack of an inner sense of worthiness and value. So recognizing that immediately gives us a goal. It gives us somewhere to go for. We're not fighting around in the dark looking for solutions. We say, well, that is the answer. And so there's a number of ways you can approach that. But one of the simplest things I found, because I struggled with this, the reason why I wrote the book I Heart Me was for me, because I had maybe quite an average amount of the external self-esteem, but none of the internal at all.
Yeah, you certainly wouldn't look at you and think you're someone who hasn't got your self-love sorted out, would we?
Yeah, but it was all external, and you see so many people in the world where all they have is the external, but then all you really need is a couple of things to go wrong, and it's shattering.
Yeah.
The inner self-esteem, the inner sense of worthiness and value, the self-love, that gives you like a buffer. It gives you a feeling of resilience that buffers some of the difficult challenges. So recognizing that is an answer, that is a way to approach it, is illuminating in some respects. It's like, I know what to do. Then the challenge is doing that. And there's a number of ways you can approach it. Louise Hay recommends mirror work, telling yourself several times a day, I love you, I really, really do, looking at yourself in the mirror. That's a great therapy. Things like the Tibetan Buddhist loving kindness meditation. May I be filled with loving kindness and be well, peaceful and at ease, happy and free of suffering. That's a really good approach. Also looking at the way that parents behaved and asking yourself, I've got a little exercise in the book, how much am I like my parents? And you look at ways that your parents behaved and the sort of things they said, and then you look at your own behaviour and language and you notice how much is similar, and you realise that you literally learned a lot of your own patterns from your parents. So we can drop those just by, again, shining a light on them. But one of the most powerful techniques I've ever found is a neuroscience approach, and it's learning to adjust your posture, because how we feel about ourselves is written all over our face and on your body. So what happens is we tend to wear our body, shoulders and tummy, midriff area especially, and facial expressions. We wear how we feel about ourselves in a variety of situations. So if we can train ourselves to stand up straight, lengthen your spine, drop your shoulders, and relax and train yourself by practicing it every day. The Harvard Power Pose, first popularised by Amy Cuddy at Harvard, where you stand like Wonder Woman for 2 minutes a day. That's really powerful. But you must add to that relentless corrections during the day. Like, correct yourself as you're walking, correct yourself as you're standing, as you come into company, whatever you're doing, and make an adjustment to your posture. And what happens, if you remember the piano study, if you move a muscle repetitively, it wires the circuits of the brain. So now the circuits of the brain you're wiring are those associated with feeling better about yourself.
Confident, and strong.
Yeah, you're adjusting strong, confident, self-esteem, self-love posture. So that's the brain circuits you're wiring. And because you're no longer indulging in the old, or indulging less in the old posture, then you're shrinking the wiring for that. And again, you get to this tipping point after a period of time where the dominant circuitry of the brain, the dominant wiring of the brain, is the wiring associated with I have an inner sense of worthiness and value. And then you find that you don't have to make these postural corrections because it's now a habit. And it's such a powerful exercise that's relatively easy to do because you're not really having to investigate the contents of your mind. So there's different ways of approaching the same subject, and it depends on the individual, really.
Yeah,
but that's my focus.
Yeah, I love that. I absolutely love that. On to the books that you've written about kindness. Why I loved Why Kindness is Good for You. That book totally rocked my world. just to explain to anyone who hasn't read it or isn't aware of the concept, why kindness is good for us.
Well, it's good for us in a number of ways. First of all, it makes us feel happier. It has massive impacts on mental health, especially as the giver of kindness. But it has a phenomenal effect in the cardiovascular system. And I investigated this quite a lot because my main fields when I worked in the pharmaceutical industry were cardiovascular and cancer, but predominantly cardiovascular. And it's amazing that when you be kind to someone, because of how it makes you feel, almost like the exact opposite from feeling stressed. You feel stressed. The feelings of stress are what give rise to the physiology of stress in the body. It's not the circumstance, because two people can have the same set of circumstances. One could feel stressed, one could feel relaxed. So the circumstance itself has got nothing to do with the physiology. The physiology of stress is a product of how that situation makes you feel. So feelings generate physiology. But when you be kind, because that makes you feel nice or warm or connected, psychologists now call it elevation, you're elevated, that produces a whole different kind of physiology from stress. In fact, in some ways, it is the exact opposite from stress. And that has tremendous benefits to the cardiovascular system. It lowers blood pressure, for example. It helps to clean arteries, thin blood, so to speak. And it also has impacts on some of the ways that the body ages internally. Almost like stress can impact some of the processes that age the body internally. So it makes sense, therefore, that the physiology of kindness would have the opposite effect. And it does indeed have the opposite effect. So I went into a lot of that for adults, children, all these different things in the book and the newer versions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? Because, initially one would think that only the recipient would feel good about the act of kindness that's been given to them. But in fact, as we know, it's both ways, which has led on, of course, to a lot of people talking about random acts of kindness. Again, if this is new for somebody, where would they start if somebody's thinking, actually, I'd quite like some of that? What are some little things that we can do? I know you've brought out the Little Book of Kindness. I'm really looking forward to seeing it. I haven't seen the book yet, but tell us a bit about that book and about some of the. Oh, lovely. Well, anyone who's watching the video can see it. Oh, cool. Okay. So presumably you've got lots of suggestions in there as to how we can practice acts of kindness, which I'm guessing, you're going to tell me don't need to cost a lot of money or necessarily even take an awful lot of time.
No, I mean, it's context. It depends on a person's context. We all have a different context, a different situation, different opportunities in life. So what I recommend towards the end of the book is a 7-day kindness challenge. And if you're really up for it, it can be a 21-day. And if you're really, really up to it, you can go the whole year, make it 365. But the challenge is to do an act of kindness every day for 7 days. And you've got to vary the act. So you can't do the same thing every day. I mean, you can if you like, but it only counts on the first day. You've got to do something different each day. Also, during that week, you've got to do at least one act of kindness that stretches you a little bit, pushes you out of your comfort zone a little bit. It might mean you have to connect with someone if that's a challenge for you. And another one has to be completely anonymous. In other words, no one must know that such a thing was you or what you actually did. Now, the reason, one of the reasons for the 7-day act of kindness is because we all have a different context in our life and different situations in our life. Suggesting a universal type of act of kindness isn't applicable to everyone. So what the 7-day does is it helps you find within the context of your own life, what are the sorts of things that I can do based on my life situation, where I go during the day, my resources, etc., etc. So I'm not so much in the book, in the precursor, the other version, the longer version of the book, the 5 side effects of kindness and why kindness is good for you. I specifically gave people a list. But in the little book, I'm saying you've got to create your own list because our life contexts are different. Yeah. So regardless of where you are, you've got to find something that you can do every day. And that then you start to learn for yourself. And that's really powerful because you learn for yourself how to actually be kind without someone telling you this is what you need to do. Kind of becomes a training program.
Right. I mean, in terms of random acts of kindness, the ones that are anonymous, I mean, I've seen, cafes now, quite a few cafes will actually put a sign outside and they'll say, do you want to pay it forward? So you pay for a coffee for the next person or you pay for an ice cream or whatever. I mean, I think those kind of things are really, really cool. But is there anything? I mean, just give us one tip, maybe just one idea that doesn't cost anything, because I think the idea of it needing to be associated with money can confuse it for some people. So just give us one freebie.
So if you know of someone in your life, whether a family member, a friend, or a work colleague who's having a hard time, ask them how they're feeling. Let them know that you're interested in how they're feeling, and just listen to them. That doesn't cost anything, but it could be a phone call, or it could be literally turning up at someone's door or at their desk at work or something and saying, like, how are you doing? Or if you know the person's having a good time, just offer just by your presence, people recognize, they get to know that you're here for them. And that seems like a tiny little thing for you, but it's a huge thing for them. Because I've been that person who's needed help at times. And my goodness, when someone says, I'm here for you, or just turns up, how are you doing? It's literally, it's a wonderful feeling. But for them, it was probably a tiny little thing. But for me, as the sufferer at the time, it was massive. It was huge. I struggled with depression several years ago. And so when that happened for me, it opened the doors to a change that wouldn't have happened. And it was my mum who did it there.
It's very interesting as well, isn't it? When people are suffering from depression or anxiety, or when there's just something really difficult going on in their life, I think you're absolutely right. For someone to offer them an act of kindness, however small, is amazing. But actually, that's almost the time when they need to do the little acts of kindness, because,
as well,
get out of yourself kind of thing. It's one of the best things you can ever do, isn't it? To actually stretch yourself a little bit while you're feeling, anxious yourself. I always used to say this to my mum when she was, having some mental health issues. I used to just say, is there anybody else, who lives near you that you could do something nice for? And I remember once she said, well, I could get a newspaper for, a friend who couldn't get out. That's an amazing thing. How amazing will that be? Something so tiny. So I think you're really right. I absolutely love your take on it all. How do you think these things link together in terms of our self-care? A lot of people are going through just a really rough time, and we hear this buzzword self-care, and we're not talking about booking yourself into a spa. These can be tiny things. How do you think all these things tie up?
Sometimes self-care can even be saying no. For example,
True.
Self-care is another version. It's one way to be kind to ourselves, because I think in the the dedicating ourselves sometimes to helping other people, it's quite easy to forget yourself. And some people actually end up spreading themselves so thin that it becomes stressful for them. And that there is even scientific research showing that the benefits of kindness get to a point until you start stretching yourself too thin, and then they start having a negative effect, because you're beginning to run out of time and feel stressed and lots of other things. So self-care becomes something, a version of being kind to yourself that you absolutely must do. I mean, for example, I try to be as kind as I can, but as a writer and a speaker, I get a lot of invitations to speak. And I used to just say yes all the time, just because I didn't like saying no. But what was happening there was I was spreading myself so thin. I mean, really all over the place. And a lot of the events were non-paying events, so I was really giving up a lot of my time, and then neglecting spending time at home with loved ones. And so eventually I had to learn, as self-care, as being kind to myself, I had to learn to say no. And it was difficult at first, because it went against my natural instinct, and also what I convinced myself about the need to be kind to others. And what got me around that is recognizing that I need to also be kind to myself, or there will come a point where that will start to become stressful, and therefore the energy of kindness won't actually be infusing the things that I'll be doing. So for me, that is something I've had to learn, and it's part of what self-care is. It's not necessarily taking a spa day, but one of the ways that I do that now is if someone needs my time, usually I can find a slot in my diary. So now what I do is I put a slot in my diary saying meeting with self. And I give that as much priority as the priority I would give to something that was really important. What I'm saying is, this meeting with myself, which is my time to do anything I want, is so important to me. I'm giving it an absolute priority by putting a 2-hour or a 1-hour slot in my diary. So I do that. And that's part of self-care for me. But because time is a big commodity for me, I find myself so busy a lot of the time, that is a great act of self-care, because I'm giving myself the time. So it's difficult really to separate being kind to others and being kind to yourself, because you really have to do both.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have to do both.
Great idea. David, we could talk forever, and I really do appreciate you saying yes to this. It really, really means a lot to me. So thank you. That was a definite act of kindness, and you've made us both feel good, I hope. I really appreciate it.
I always love chatting with you, Janey.
Good. So you've got lots of books, as we've discussed, and you've got lots going on. So tell us where people can find more about your work, and just remind us of the title of the new book, and then we'll look forward to getting hold of that.
Right, well, the new book is called The Little Book of Kindness, and it's my first fully illustrated book. So it's like, there's little, every page.
Lovely.
Every
so
page
a lovely kind of dip-inable book. Fantastic.
Yeah, it's for dippers and stuff. It's a really cool.
Excellent.
And it basically covers all the scientific benefits, all the physiological and mental, emotional health benefits of being kind, but all nicely fancy illustrated with exercises and practices to do for self-care, but also to demonstrate the effects. And so all the info on that and myself is on my website, drdavidhamilton.com. And I'm not sure when this is going live, but at the moment, for anyone who pre-orders the book, they get a free online course on the biology and contagiousness of kindness, which is one of my brand new online course, and that's free, 4 lessons. So the book comes out on the 7th of February, so anyone who pre-orders before then gets that course. The link to do that is on my website.
Excellent. David, thank you so much. We really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you some point in the future. Appreciate it. Thank you.
I look forward to that too, Janey.
Cheers. Thank you to David, and The Little Book of Kindness is out now. And if you haven't read his other books, try and get copies. They're all just excellent. And I'm not going to give you another self-care tip this week. And the main reason is because I want to leave everybody with the thought that David left us with, because it really made an impression on me that sometimes the biggest act of kindness to yourself is to say no. So many of us overcommit and we try and say yes to absolutely everything. So that's the top tip this week, is practice extreme self-care and say no if you need to. Set your boundaries, particularly if you are in those early stages of sobriety. You need to protect that at all costs. So if that means saying no to a social gathering or to a lunch where you know everyone else is drinking, if you don't feel up to it, then say no, because you come first. We still have our lovely self-care prizes to give away. I'm working with the charity My Yard. They provide healthy food to people in crisis. The reason they set up this campaign, Stay Dry Till July, is because they saw such a massive increase in people who had mental health issues and anxiety, and it was intrinsically linked with alcohol. So we thought this would be a fun campaign, really. The whole idea is we're just flagging up the idea of it's not just for January, stay dry till July, and then if you manage that, we reckon there'll be no looking back. And all we're doing is asking you to share self-care tips and opportunity to win some of these really nice self-care prizes. So you just got to follow us on Instagram at Janey Lee Grace. Use the hashtag Stay Dry Till July and tell us your little self-care tips. Don't have to be big, can be super small. Love to hear your stories as well. You can email me, Janey at janeyleegrace.com. Don't forget that's Janey. And once again, I would appreciate it so much if you would subscribe to this podcast on iTunes and give the show a rate and leave a comment if you're able to. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much for listening. See you next time. Thank you for listening to the Alcohol Free Life podcast with Janey Lee Grace. Please subscribe to us on iTunes, rate us, share on social media, and tune in again.